In 1945, three cousins left their grandmother's farmhouse on the outskirts of Garland Creek, Missouri, and were never seen again. No bodies, no witnesses. Only one photograph taken that summer, a photograph that wouldn't be fully understood until 70 years later, when a forgotten attic box reopened a family's oldest wound. Everything changed. This is the story of the Garland Creek disappearances, and the photograph that solved them. Subscribe for more true crime mysteries and real-life psychological thrillers. August 5th, 1945. The morning air shimmered with heat rising off the fields. Cicadas screamed from the cottonwoods lining Garland Creek, and the smell of cut hay lingered thick and sweet. At the edge of the old Barrett farm, three children, Tommy, age 11, June, age 9, and Howard, just 7, played by the weathered red barn. Their laughter drifted through the golden air, the kind of laughter people remember for a lifetime after it's gone. Their grandmother, Eunice Barrett, watched from the porch. She was a stoic woman with a kerchief tied tight against the humidity, her wrinkled hands folded in her lap. Behind her, the radio hummed with distant war news. Japan still fighting, the world still waiting for peace. "Don't go past the tree line," she called, shielding her eyes from the sun. "You hear me, Tommy?" Tommy waved without turning. "We won't, Grandma." But they did. Just after noon, a neighbor passing by saw the children walking along the dirt road that curved toward the creek. They were holding hands, June in the middle, skipping in her worn canvas shoes. The neighbor, Mr. Frank Dallow, remembered thinking they looked like a painting. By sunset, they were gone. When Eunice realized they hadn't come back for supper, she sent her oldest son, Walter, to check the road. He found nothing, no footprints, no clothes, no bicycle tracks. By nightfall, lanterns glowed across the fields as neighbors combed the creek bed. 3 days later, Sheriff Harlan Wicks called the search exhaustive. The current had been too strong, he said. Strong enough, apparently, to carry away 3 children and every trace they'd ever existed. The children must have slipped, drowned, and been carried off downstream. But no one ever found a body. Not one. And no one could explain why Eunice received a letter, postmarked 2 days after the disappearance, containing a single, undeveloped roll of Kodak film. On the envelope, written in a child's careful hand, "Grandma, we're safe now." Spring, 2023. Garland Creek, Missouri. The attic smelled like cedar and old summers pressed flat between cardboard and dust. Dust particles floated in the sunlight like slow-moving ghosts. Clara Dallow, 36, pushed a stack of yellowed newspapers aside and opened the last of her late father's storage boxes. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just cleaning out the house before selling it. But when she peeled back the lid, something shifted in her chest. Inside, beneath folded army letters and a brittle Bible, lay a small metal film canister, rusted, dented, but unmistakably old. She froze. There was something almost reverent about the way the canister sat there, cushioned in faded linen. Handwritten on masking tape across the lid was a single word: Barrett. Clara's heart gave a small, startled kick. Her grandmother's maiden name. She glanced toward the attic window. Outside, the Missouri spring was in full bloom. Dogwoods in white explosion, wind sweeping across the wheat fields. But in that moment, the world narrowed to the size of her palm. Gingerly, she opened it. Inside was a rolled strip of brittle 35mm film. It had fused together in places from decades of heat, but several frames were still visible. Tiny rectangles of shadowed faces, barely legible. Her father had never spoken much about the Barrett side of the family, just that they were complicated people. But Clara remembered one bedtime story her grandmother told once, when Clara was only 6. 3 children, cousins, who went missing long ago. She'd said their names like a prayer: Tommy, June, Howard, and then kissed Clara's forehead, whispering, "You're the only one who looks like her." The attic seemed to tilt slightly. Clara carried the canister downstairs, careful not to smudge the brittle film. She set it on the kitchen counter beside her phone and stared at it for a long time before whispering to the empty house, 78 years later, "What if you can still tell me something?" That evening, she drove to Garland County Historical Society, a modest red brick building at the edge of town. The front desk clerk, a thin woman named Mabel, peered curiously at the film. "Well now, that's wartime stock all right," Mabel said, turning it under the light. "You find this in the Dallow house?" Clara nodded. "Your Grandma Barrett's family." "Yes, she was Eunice's granddaughter." "I'm her great-granddaughter, I guess." Mabel's expression softened. "Lord, honey, that family's had its share of heartache." 2 hours later, they stood in the small dark room, the film gently soaking in solution. The chemical smell was sharp and nostalgic. Slowly, frame by frame, the images began to emerge on the paper, gray silhouettes deepening into detail. The first was nothing unusual. 3 children by a barn. Clara's breath caught, the same barn she'd seen in family albums, long since collapsed. Tommy, June, and Howard. The second frame showed them sitting near the creek, smiling. The sunlight caught June's hair like spun gold. But in the third image, Clara saw something that turned her stomach cold. Behind the children, near the edge of the frame, half in shadow, stood a man. Tall, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, his face obscured, his hand resting on someone, just outside the light. Mabel frowned, leaning closer. "Who's that?" "Doesn't look like any Barrett I know." Clara swallowed hard. There were only the 3 of them that day. Grandma said she watched them leave from the porch. The old clock in the hallway, which she'd never really noticed before, suddenly sounded too loud, each tick like a nail being tapped into wood. When the final frame developed, Clara felt her knees weaken. The children were gone from the picture. Only the creek remained. But the man was still there, and this time his face was turned toward the camera. It was expressionless, cold, and unmistakably real. The negative bore a faint scratch across his left eye, almost like a scar. Mabel whispered, "Honey, I think you just found something the sheriff missed in 1945. Clara couldn't look away. For 78 years, her family had lived under a shadow cast by that single summer day. And now, staring at the man in the photograph, she knew with chilling certainty. The past wasn't buried at all. It had been waiting. The next morning broke gray and wet, a thin veil of rain turning Garland Creek's main street into a mirror of puddled asphalt. Clara parked outside the county courthouse, the old stone building where the original 1945 missing persons files were said to be kept. The flag above it hung limp in the drizzle. Inside, the air smelled of paper and lemon cleaner. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. A sign read, "Archives, basement level." Clara followed the narrow stairway down. The archivist on duty was Elias Wicks, a soft-spoken man in his 70s with a sheriff's badge tattoo faintly visible on his forearm. When she gave her name, his brows lifted in recognition. "Dallow? As in Barrett Dallow?" he asked, wiping his glasses. "Yes, I found something yesterday. Film from 1945. I think it's connected to the disappearance." Elias's eyes sharpened. "My father was Sheriff Wicks back then. That was his case." He motioned for her to follow. The basement corridor opened into a low-ceilinged room lined with metal filing cabinets. Dust motes swam through the fluorescent light. Elias unlocked one drawer labeled Missing Children, 1940 to 49, and slid out a thick manila folder stamped in red ink. Barrett case number 457 to 45. He laid the folder flat on the table. The paper crackled. Inside were brittle photographs, hand-typed statements, and black and white maps of the creek's bend. Clara's fingers hovered over them, trembling slightly. "Did your father ever find anything?" Elias shook his head. He swore something didn't add up. The current was slow that summer. Bodies don't just vanish. But the war ended that same week. Town wanted to move on. The county closed it quiet. He slid a smaller envelope toward her. Evidence photos, ones never released to the press. Clara hesitated, then opened it. The first picture showed a boot print in mud, child-sized, near a shallow part of the creek. The second, a torn scrap of fabric with faint floral patterning. The third. Her breath hitched. A man's footprint beside the children's, far larger, the heel worn smooth. She took out her phone and pulled up the digitized version of the film, still from last night. She zoomed in on the shadowed man. His left boot matched the tread pattern in the evidence photo, exactly. Elias leaned closer, frowning. "Where did you get this?" "From my father's attic," she said quietly. It was mailed to their grandmother 2 days after they disappeared. He stared at her, the color draining slightly from his face. Then, whoever took them wanted her to know they were still alive, at least for a while. Rain pattered against the basement window. Elias reached for a separate folder. There was one witness your family never knew about. A farmhand named Alton Merrick. He claimed he saw a black truck parked by the tree line that afternoon. Said a man loaded something, maybe feed sacks, into the back before driving east. Sheriff Wicks followed up, but Merrick disappeared 3 months later. Clara's pulse quickened. Disappeared? Left town, supposedly. But no record of him after 45. She traced the photograph again. The man's shadow seemed almost to move beneath her fingertips. "Do you think Merrick could have been involved?" Elias sighed. "Could be. Or maybe he saw too much." He locked the files back into the drawer, then turned to her. "I'll make you a copy of everything. But be careful digging this up, Miss Dallow. Around here, old ghosts don't like to be woken." Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the courthouse steps slick and gleaming. Clara stood there a long time, the copy of the file pressed against her chest. The wind carried the faint scent of honeysuckle from somewhere down the block, sweet, familiar, and suddenly nauseating. She walked to her car, slid behind the wheel, and stared through the windshield at the courthouse's reflection. On impulse, she reached into her bag for the envelope that had held the film. The masking tape label, Barrett, was curling at the edges. Beneath it, something faint glimmered. She scraped gently with her fingernail until the top layer of tape peeled away. Another word emerged in faded ink beneath. Merrick. The name pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat. She started the engine. The old road stretched before her, wet and glistening, leading toward the overgrown farmland her grandmother once called home. If the name on that tape was real, then the man in the photograph, and the man who mailed it, might be one and the same. And someone in Garland Creek had spent nearly 80 years making sure no one ever connected them. As the clouds broke and sunlight cut through, Clara drove toward the past, where the answers waited in silence beside the creek. The dirt road to the old Barrett farm hadn't been paved since before Clara's grandmother was born. Gravel crunched under her tires as she passed acres of tall, whispering grass. The land felt both endless and confined, the horizon stretching wide while the air pressed heavy with memory. The farmhouse came into view, a hollow shell of gray wood sagging beneath its own history. The porch slanted toward the earth, its boards split and silvered with age. Beyond it, the barn leaned sideways, half swallowed by kudzu. Clara parked beneath the dying pecan tree and cut the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No birdsong, no wind, just the pulse of her own heart and the faint creak of the house settling. She stepped out, boots sinking into damp soil. For a long moment, She simply stared. This was where they'd lived, where they'd last been seen alive. The door yielded under her touch, swinging open with a moan. Dust swirled in the sunlight. Inside, the air was stale, layered with mildew and old tobacco. Wallpaper peeled in long curls from the parlor walls, revealing wood the color of ash. She moved through the room slowly, her flashlight cutting narrow paths of light. Her grandmother's voice came back to her in fragments. Stories about family suppers, the smell of biscuits baking, children's laughter echoing down the hallway. Now, only echoes remained. In the kitchen, a porcelain sink held the skeleton of a dead bird. On the table lay an enamel bowl, still upright after decades, as though someone had meant to return. Clara's phone buzzed. A text from Mabel at the Historical Society. Elias called. Sheriff's logs show one more note from 1945. Found it behind the original report. Will scan and send. Might want to check cellar. The cellar. Clara turned toward the back door. A narrow stairway led down into darkness, the wooden steps soft with rot. She hesitated at the top, breathing through the rising scent of damp earth and iron. Then she descended. The beam of her flashlight caught rows of canning jars on sagging shelves. Dust, cobwebs, rusted tools. Nothing unusual. Until the light glinted off something near the far wall. A nail protruded from a plank at shoulder height, holding a small, disc-colored photograph. The paper had fused to the wood, but the image was still visible. 3 children by the creek. June's smile unmistakable. But in this photo, the man's shadow wasn't behind them. It was in front. Clara's pulse quickened. The difference meant the photographer had moved, or someone else had taken this picture entirely. She leaned closer. The corner of the photo had been scratched away deliberately, as if to erase a mark. Her phone chimed again. A photo message from Mabel. The scanned sheriff's note. Faded typewritten text. August 9th, 1945. Addendum received anonymous tip. Check under the floor where the family sleeps. Caller hung up before identifying. Search yielded nothing. Case suspended. Clara's eyes lifted to the wooden beams above her, the ceiling of what used to be the ground floor bedroom. Her hands shook as she pressed against the low boards. One plank sounded hollow. She found a crowbar among the tools and wedged it under the edge. The wood split with a muffled crack. Dust poured down in thin streams, followed by something small that clattered onto the cellar floor. A tin whistle, its surface mottled green with corrosion. She crouched to pick it up, wiping it clean with her sleeve. The initials HB were carved near the mouthpiece. Howard Barrett. Her breath caught. The room seemed to tilt. The whistle was ice cold despite the humid air, as though it had been waiting. Above her, a faint sound echoed through the floorboards, creaking footsteps. Clara froze. She hadn't left any door open, and there'd been no car on the road for miles. The footsteps paused directly overhead, then continued toward the front of the house. Heart hammering, Clara turned off her flashlight and pressed herself into the shadows. Dust drifted from the ceiling as someone, moved above, slow and deliberate. The house groaned. The front door squealed open. Then silence again. Minutes passed before Clara dared climb back up the stairs. The parlor stood empty, sunlight slanting through broken windows. The front door hung ajar. She stepped outside, scanning the yard. The grass near her car was flattened in 2 parallel tracks, boot prints pressed into the mud. Fresh, large. A faint metallic gleam caught her eye by the pecan tree. She knelt. Lying there, half buried in damp leaves, was an old brass button engraved with a sheriff's star. For a moment she thought it might have fallen from one of Elias's father's uniforms, until she noticed the rust. This button had been here a very long time. The whistle in her pocket felt suddenly heavy, as though tethered to the land itself. She stood there until the wind stirred again, whispering through the tall grass, carrying the faintest echo of children's laughter, or maybe the memory of it. Whatever happened here in 1945 hadn't ended. It had just settled in and waited for someone reckless enough to listen. Clara locked the car doors the moment she got inside, hands trembling on the steering wheel. She looked back once at the farmhouse. The upstairs curtain, ripped and gray, fluttered slightly. Someone, or something, had moved it. By the time Clara reached Garland Creek again, evening had fallen. The last light bled across the horizon in thin, copper streaks. She parked outside the Historical Society and hurried up the stone steps, the tin whistle wrapped carefully in a handkerchief inside her coat pocket. Mabel was gone for the day, but Elias Wicks sat in the back room surrounded by open files, his glasses perched low on his nose, a single desk lamp throwing a yellow halo over the table. When he saw her, he frowned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," Clara said, placing the whistle on the table between them. Elias picked it up, turning it under the light. The faint letters HB glimmered. "Howard Barrett," he murmured. "Where did you find this?" "In the cellar of their farmhouse. Under the floorboards. Exactly where the last note said to look." Elias set it down slowly. "My father always thought that call was genuine. He searched, but not deep enough, apparently." She hesitated, then told him everything. The second photograph nailed to the wall, the footsteps overhead, the fresh boot prints outside. Elias listened in silence, his expression tightening with every detail. When she finished, he exhaled through his nose. "You shouldn't be there alone, Clara." "Not with someone prowling that property. I don't think it's random," she said quietly. "Someone knew I'd find that film. Maybe even planted it years ago." Elias rubbed his temples. "Let's start with what we know." He opened his father's notebook, flipping to a brittle page marked with a paperclip. "Here, Alton Merrick. Farmhand, 34. Worked 2 seasons for the Barretts. Sheriff Wicks questioned him 3 times, but never charged him. And then," he tapped a line near the bottom, "he vanished in November of 45. No forwarding address. His paycheck was never cashed." Clara leaned closer. "Do we have a photo of him?" Elias reached into another folder. Inside was a small, grainy image. A man in overalls, tall, lean, his hair slicked back. The photo had been taken for a work permit. His left eye bore a faint vertical scar. Clara's throat tightened. "That's him. The man in the photograph?" Elias asked. She nodded. "Same build, same scar." Elias set the photo down slowly, his hand trembling just a little. Then Merrick wasn't the witness. He was the man behind the camera. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that revelation settling like dust between them. Finally, Elias stood and crossed to a filing cabinet. "There's something you should see." He pulled out a thin folder labeled Personnel Record. Sheriff's Office, 1940 to 1947. From it, he withdrew an old group photograph. 5 men in uniform standing in front of the courthouse. He pointed to the man second from the left. "That's my father, Sheriff Harlan Wicks." Then to the one beside him, young, tall, wearing the same badge pinned to his chest. "And that's Deputy Alton Merrick." Clara blinked. "He was a deputy." "Briefly," Elias said. "Suspended for misconduct in 44. Something about falsifying evidence. My father reinstated him after manpower shortages during the war." Clara felt the ground tilt beneath her. "So Merrick knew the Barretts, worked for them." "And worked for your father." Elias nodded grimly. "He was close to the family, too. I remember hearing my mother mention it once. Said Merrick helped fix their tractor the spring before the kids disappeared." "Why didn't the sheriff disclose that connection?" Clara asked. Elias hesitated. "Because he might not have known how deep it went. Or maybe," he looked away, "maybe he did." The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Clara studied the deputy's face in the photograph. Something about his expression, a faint smirk, made her skin crawl. If Merrick took that film, why send it to Eunice Barrett? Guilt, maybe. Elias said. Or power. Some men want to be caught, but only on their terms. He flipped open another file, pulling out a faded incident report. My father wrote this the year after the case closed. Anonymous donation received. Camera equipment left at station doorstep, belonging to AM. No prints, no follow-up. The initials AM burned into Clara's vision like an afterimage. Camera equipment, she murmured. Then the film might have been one of his undeveloped rolls. Maybe there were more. Elias looked up sharply. If that's true, there could still be evidence hidden in his property. His cabin was east of the creek, near the old quarry. Long abandoned now. I want to see it, Clara said. Elias hesitated. It's private land, technically. And not safe. The roof caved in years ago. I'll be careful. You're not going alone, he said firmly. If Merrick had connections inside the department, someone might still want this buried. I'll come with you in the morning. Clara nodded reluctantly. As she left the building, she caught her reflection in the glass door. Pale, eyes shadowed. Older somehow. The whistle pressed cold against her chest through her coat. Outside, lightning flickered low across the horizon. Rain began again, soft and steady. She got into her car, wiping condensation from the windshield. In the passenger seat lay the photocopy of Merrick's file. A detail she hadn't noticed before caught her eye. His listed address in 1945, 141 Creek Road. She frowned. That wasn't east of the quarry. It was the same road leading past her grandmother's old house. And at the bottom of the document, typed faintly but legible, was one final line added in a different ink. Transferred to protective custody. Do not release information. Clara's pulse stuttered. Protective custody. Merrick hadn't vanished at all. Someone had hidden him. And if that protection came from the sheriff's office, then the truth wasn't just buried in Garland Creek. It had been sealed shut from the inside. Dawn came muted and gray. Clouds stretched thin like gauze across the Missouri sky. Clara pulled her coat tighter as she stepped outside. The air smelled faintly of rain and cold iron, like memory itself had a scent. Elias's truck pulled into her driveway right on time. He climbed out stiffly, the old joints in his knees audible even over the gravel. You sure you want to do this? He asked. Clara nodded. After last night, I can't stop now. They drove east out of Garland Creek, past the church and the boarded-up feed store, the road narrowing until the trees began to close in. Miles of forest flanked them, bare-limbed oaks and sycamores reaching into a fog so dense the world felt suspended. Elias spoke little, his face drawn. The whistle lay on the dashboard, its carved initials catching dull light. After nearly 40 minutes, they turned down an overgrown path. The truck's tires crunched through wet leaves. Finally, through the thinning trees, they saw it. A one-room cabin, half collapsed against the edge of a limestone quarry. The quarry itself gaped like an old wound, its walls veined with white rock and moss. Pools of still water reflected the pale sky. Clara climbed out, flashlight in hand. The front door hung off its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and damp soil. A broken chair lay near the hearth, and newspapers from the 1950s littered the floor, curling into brittle scrolls. Elias swept his light slowly along the walls. My father came here once, he murmured. Said Merrick built it himself. Lived like a ghost. Clara moved toward the small table near the window. Beneath a crust of dust lay something half-buried. A metal tin. She lifted it carefully and brushed the grime away. The lid popped open with a sigh. Inside were several black and white photographs, their edges frayed, The images faded but intact. The first few showed landscapes, creek beds, trees, the Barrett barn from a distance. But then the subject shifted. A child's hand reaching from the water, a shoe lying in mud. Then another picture, closer this time, of 3 small forms lying beneath what looked like branches or reeds. The image was overexposed, details blurred, but the implication hit like ice. Clara's voice came out in a whisper. He photographed them after they died. Elias's jaw clenched, or pretended they were. There's no proof these were bodies. Clara flipped to the next image. Her breath caught. This one showed the farmhouse cellar, the same beams she'd stood beneath yesterday. A dark stain marked the floorboards. And on the wall, above it, faint chalk markings. Numbers. Look, she said, there's handwriting. Elias leaned closer. 4-5-9, he read aloud. Could be a date. Or coordinates. He turned toward the far corner of the cabin, where a large cedar trunk sat half-hidden behind a fallen beam. Help me with this. Together they dragged it out. The lock was rusted but gave way under Elias's crowbar. Inside lay a tangle of decayed clothing, a child's shoe, and several notebooks wrapped in oilcloth. Clara opened one carefully. The handwriting was small, meticulous. August 6th, 1945. They're safe now. The world burns, and I keep them where no one will look. I promised her I'd protect them, and I will. Even from the sheriff, even from the mother. The page trembled in Clara's hands. He didn't think he killed them, she whispered. He thought he was saving them. Elias rubbed his face, disbelief shadowing his expression. Saving them from what? She turned another page. August 9th. The girl won't stop crying for home. The boy says he saw his father by the creek, but he's gone now. They'll thank me one day. Clara's throat went dry. He took them alive. Then where are they now? Elias asked softly. The next entries grew incoherent. Ink smudged, sentences crossed out. Too much noise in the night. Voices under the floor. I built it wrong. They won't stay quiet. The final page bore only 3 words, scrawled in heavy pencil. The sheriff knows. A low sound echoed from outside. Metal scraping stone. Both froze. Elias motioned for silence. The sound came again. Closer this time, followed by the crunch of boots on gravel. Clara turned off her flashlight. Through the cracked window, she saw movement by the truck, a dark shape leaning against the driver's door. Stay here, Elias whispered. He moved toward the entrance, gun drawn. Clara crouched beside the cedar trunk, heart hammering. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, its screen lighting faintly. A text. Unknown number. You're not supposed to be there. The message vanished before she could screenshot it. A shout tore through the air. Elias's voice. Then a gunshot. Clara's body reacted before her mind did. She bolted to the doorway, scanning the clearing. Elias stood by the truck, weapon raised, smoke curling from the barrel. A man lay in the mud near the quarry's edge, clutching his shoulder. The man lifted his head, eyes wide with pain but recognition flaring there. Clara froze. She'd seen that face, aged, scarred, but unmistakable, from the photograph in the archives. Alton Merrick. The name hit her like cold water. No, she whispered. That can't be possible. Elias backed toward her, still aiming. He's alive. The wounded man laughed, a dry, ragged sound. Alive enough, he croaked. Told you to stop digging, girl. Then he rolled toward the quarry's lip and disappeared into the water below. The splash echoed like a gunshot. Elias reached the edge, but the dark surface had already stilled. They stared down into the rippling blackness, rain beginning again, soft and relentless. When Clara finally looked at Elias, his face was pale as the limestone. He should have been dead 70 years ago, he whispered. What the hell did we just see? Clara didn't answer. Her gaze had fallen to the trunk again, where something glinted beneath the notebooks. A small metal locket, tarnished with age. She lifted it gently. Inside was a photograph of the 3 children, and a man's hand resting protectively on June's shoulder. The same scarred hand that had vanished beneath the quarry water moments before. Rain turned heavy by the time Elias and Clara reached the sheriff's station. Both were soaked to the bone, shoes caked with quarry mud. The fluorescent lights in the lobby felt too bright, too clean for what they had just witnessed. A medic pressed a towel into Clara's hands while another officer examined the photographs and notebooks she carried in a sealed evidence bag. Elias gave his statement first, voice steady but hollow. He was there, he kept repeating. Merrick, the same man from the old photographs. He's older, gray hair, face scarred, but alive. The duty sergeant, a young man who'd never known the weight of unsolved things, frowned. Sir, if this Merrick disappeared in 1945, that would make him 90 plus. Elias finished. I know what I saw. When Clara stepped forward to give her account, her voice trembled only once. He knew my name, said I wasn't supposed to be there. The sergeant jotted the phrase down, underlining it twice. They were kept for hours. Photographs catalogued, statements typed, questions repeated until they lost meaning. By midnight, the search teams had reached the quarry. Divers worked beneath halogen floodlights, their beams slicing through rain and dark water. Elias and Clara waited in the back of a police van, wrapped in gray blankets that smelled faintly of bleach. What if he's dead this time? She asked. Elias stared out toward the quarry. Then maybe the truth drowned with him. But when the divers surfaced, their voices were urgent. They had found something, but not Merrick. The discovery came at dawn. A wooden crate wedged in a fissure 15 feet below the quarry's edge. It was hauled up carefully, dripping mud and algae. The officers pried the lid open. Inside lay 3 small bundles wrapped in oil-soaked canvas. For a moment no one spoke. Then the coroner stepped forward, peeling back one layer. Tiny bones. A hush fell over the clearing. The rain slowed, as if the sky itself were listening. Clara's knees buckled. Elias caught her before she fell. 3 sets, the coroner said quietly. Children, approximately 8 to 10 years of age. No one had to say their names. Back at the station, the coroner's preliminary report confirmed what they feared. The remains were consistent with the Barrett cousins. The cause of death, inconclusive, though each skull bore faint fracturing, possibly blunt force trauma. The sheriff's office sealed off the entire area. Media vans began arriving by noon, their antennas rising like silver weeds along the road. Inside, Clara sat motionless in the briefing room, watching rain trace lines down the glass. The whistle lay on the table beside her, still streaked with mud from the farmhouse. Elias entered quietly and placed 2 mugs of coffee down. They'll release the statement soon, he said. Officially, they're calling it a recovered missing persons case pending identification. Clara nodded absently. He buried them under the water all this time. Elias hesitated. Or someone else did. She turned to him. You think he wasn't the killer. I think Merrick believed he was saving them. From what, I don't know. But those notebooks, they read like a man being controlled, not in control. Clara's brow furrowed. Controlled by who? He didn't answer. Instead, he slid an evidence photo across the table, a picture of the final notebook page. Beneath the words, "The sheriff knows," there was a faint imprint, as if something had once been written above and later erased. Under blacklight, technicians had revealed the hidden text. He told me to take them, said it would keep her quiet. Her, Clara repeated. You think he meant Eunice Barrett? Maybe. Or maybe someone else entirely. Elias sighed. My father's name keeps surfacing, Clara. If he ordered Merrick to take those children, why would a sheriff do that? Maybe to protect someone in town. Maybe himself. He ran a weary hand through his hair. After the war, my father changed. Stopped talking about the Barrett case. Burned a pile of files behind the station. Said some truths rot better in silence. Clara looked back at the window. Outside, reporters clustered near the steps, microphones poised like weapons. If Merrick's alive, he's the only one who can answer for it. Elias shook his head. The Current hasn't given up a body yet. If he survived the fall, he's out there watching. That night, Clara returned to her grandmother's empty house. She couldn't bear the motel again. The hum of strangers, the sterile lighting. The farmhouse felt haunted, but it was their haunting. She lit a kerosene lamp and sat at the kitchen table, spreading out copies of the recovered photographs. The three cousins smiling by the creek. The blurred shapes beneath reeds. The cellar shot. Somewhere between exhaustion and grief, she noticed a pattern she hadn't seen before. In each picture, the same small object appeared in the corner of the frame. A square wooden post carved with 3 notches. A boundary marker. She flipped through the notebooks until she found the matching description. I built the crosspost by the quarry so they'd know where to rest. 3 cuts, 1 for each promise. Clara's pulse quickened. The crosspost might still stand, weathered, hidden among the rocks. If Merrick had placed anything else nearby, it could reveal what really happened that night. Thunder rolled across the fields. She closed the notebook and reached for her phone to call Elias. Before she could dial, the landline rang. The sound was jarring, ancient, echoing through the house. She lifted the receiver slowly. Hello? For a moment, only static. Then a man's voice. Hoarse, distant, barely above a whisper. Tell the sheriff I kept my promise. The line went dead. Clara stood frozen, the dial tone droning in her ear. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the yard. For a split second, she saw a figure standing near the tree line, tall, motionless, the silhouette of a man. When darkness returned, he was gone. By morning, Garland Creek was swarming with reporters. Cameras flashed outside the sheriff's office, their cords snaking across wet pavement. The town, quiet for 70 years, was suddenly alive with voices, questions, and ghosts. Clara pushed through the crowd beside Elias. A woman with a microphone called after her. Miss Dallow, is it true your family's been hiding new evidence? She kept walking. Inside, the hallway buzzed with tension. Deputies carrying boxes, phones ringing non-stop. Detective Marla Kearns, a blunt woman with steady eyes, met them in the conference room. On the table sat 3 small evidence boxes labeled Barrett Remains 1 through 3. The sight of them made Clara's stomach twist. Marla nodded toward a folder. Autopsy confirms it. The cousins. Merrick's notebooks mention a crosspost, right? Yes, Clara said. 3 notches. Marla flipped open a photo taken at the quarry that morning. A wooden post rising from the shallows, algae-covered but intact. Beneath it, divers had found a tin box sealed with wax. Inside that tin, they discovered a folded letter, dated August 10th, 1945, signed in trembling ink, Sheriff Henry Wicks. Elias stared at the signature. My father, Marla read aloud. To whomever finds this, I did what I had to. The Barrett children saw what they were never meant to see. Merrick was to take them someplace safe until I could decide. But he disobeyed. If he's found, may God judge him kindly. Tell Eunice I kept my promise. The words settled like dust. Clara's pulse pounded. Saw what they weren't meant to see? What does that mean? Elias looked shaken. He's not saying they were in danger. He's saying they witnessed something. Marla closed the file. There's more. In the courthouse basement, we recovered a sealed trunk from evidence storage. It was misfiled under a property dispute. Inside were photos from your grandfather's camera. She laid them out carefully. The first image showed the Barrett farmhouse porch, Eunice standing there with her apron tied, her gaze turned toward someone off-frame. The second, taken moments later, caught the edge of a shadow. A man in uniform, a military police uniform. That insignia, Elias whispered, pointing. U.S. Army, Fort Leonard Division. The war was ending. Then, Marla nodded. There was a munitions train derailment outside Garland Creek that summer. Government cleanup teams came through. Some of the barrels went missing. Unstable compounds. My guess? Jim Barrett, Clara's great-uncle, found something he shouldn't have while fishing. The kids saw it too. Clara felt the room tilt. So the sheriff, your father, was protecting the government? Or protecting the town, Marla said quietly. They stored the missing chemicals in that limestone quarry for disposal. It wasn't supposed to leak, but it did. Animals died. The kids might have seen workers dumping it. If they talked, it would have ruined Garland Creek. Elias sank into a chair. So he ordered Merrick to move them, to hide the witnesses. But Merrick panicked, Clara said. He took them and kept them. Thought he was saving them from something worse. From my father, Elias murmured. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with years of unanswered prayers. Marla finally said, We'll exhume the sheriff's body for handwriting comparison. I want confirmation before we make this public. Elias's eyes were distant. He's buried up on the ridge. Beside my mother, Clara reached for his hand, but he was already somewhere else, trapped between loyalty and truth. That evening they drove out to the Ridge Cemetery. The rain had cleared, leaving fog rising from the grass like breath from the earth. The sheriff's headstone stood crooked under a cedar tree. Elias knelt, tracing the carved letters. Henry J. Wicks, 1907 to 1973, faithful servant of Garland Creek. Faithful, he said bitterly. He served something all right. Clara placed her flashlight on the ground, its beam cutting across wet stone. Elias, what if Merrick didn't just take orders? What if he believed in your father's cause? That's why he came back, to finish something. Elias's expression hardened. If he's alive, we'll find him. A rustle came from the trees. Both turned, alert. For an instant, Clara thought she saw movement. A flicker of gray fabric vanishing behind a monument. Elias drew his flashlight and moved toward the sound, but the woods gave nothing back except the faint creak of branches. When he returned, his face was pale. Someone's been here tonight. Look. He pointed to the ground. Fresh footprints in the mud. Larger than Clara's, deeper than his, leading directly toward the sheriff's grave, and stopping there. She crouched. The soil at the base of the headstone had been disturbed recently, the grass torn away. A small indentation remained, as if something had been placed and then removed. Clara brushed away the wet earth and found a folded photograph pressed against the stone. It was the same family photo from the attic film, the 3 children and the dark silhouette behind them. But now someone had circled the shadowed man's hand in red ink, written beneath in shaky script. The town sleeps because I keep its sins. Elias exhaled sharply. He's taunting us. Clara slipped the photograph into her jacket. No, she said quietly. He's warning us. Something here still isn't buried. A cold wind rose, carrying the scent of damp cedar and rust. In the distance, thunder rolled again. Elias stared down at his father's grave. Then maybe Garland Creek isn't done confessing. The morning news turned Garland Creek into a spectacle. Helicopters hovered above the quarry. Anchors whispered about newly uncovered corruption, and grainy black and white photos of the missing cousins flashed across every screen. Clara watched from a diner booth, untouched coffee cooling before her. The waitress turned the volume up. Documents suggest a possible link between Sheriff Henry Wicks and a classified Army operation in 1945. Officials have not yet confirmed. Clara lowered her eyes. Around her, locals whispered. Old men in feed caps muttered that the Barretts had stirred up bad luck by digging into the past. Others said the quarry had always been cursed. Elias arrived, exhaustion carved into his face. He slid a folder across the table. Marla pulled this from the state archives before the feds got wind. It's a manifest from Fort Leonard, dated August 2nd, 1945. Clara opened it. A list of munitions shipments, most checked off, except one, shipment 459B, industrial disposal, confidential. Next to it, in faded pencil, delivered to G Creek Quarry. Elias pointed to the signature line, Henry J. Wicks. My father signed it, Clara's breath caught. So the sheriff wasn't covering for Merrick. He was covering for the U.S. Army, and the Army's already here, Elias said, nodding toward the window. Outside, 2 black SUVs idled near the courthouse. Men in plain suits stood in the drizzle, their posture military straight. An hour later, they were summoned to the mayor's office. Inside waited Major Lewis Cartwright, a man with cold eyes and a uniform that seemed too new for his age. Miss Dallow, Mr. Wicks, he began, voice clipped. You've obtained restricted government material. We're reclaiming it. Clara crossed her arms. These are my family's remains. You don't get to hide behind national security. Cartwright studied her for a long moment. Your family's tragedy was unfortunate, but you've stepped into something much larger. The quarry housed experimental ordnance, unstable, lethal. When your cousins went missing, the Army was already dismantling the operation. If the public learns children died because of military negligence, it'll reopen wounds best left closed. Elias's jaw tightened. So your men buried them? Cartwright's expression didn't change. We contained a situation. Clara's voice shook. You mean you used Merrick to silence them? Mr. Merrick was a contractor, Cartwright replied. Psychological issues, we later discovered. He was meant to relocate the witnesses temporarily. He overstepped. Clara slammed her hand on the table. He killed them. Allegedly, Cartwright said. And yet, here we are, 79 years later, still breathing the same air. I suggest you remember that before making enemies of the wrong ghosts, Elias half rose, fury in his face. But Cartwright simply gathered the files and left, his boots echoing down the hallway. That night, back at the farmhouse, Clara couldn't sleep. Every creak of the board sounded like a whisper. She replayed the major's words. Overstepped. Relocate the witnesses. If Merrick had meant only to hide them, why the crate of bones? Why the letter from Sheriff Wicks saying, I kept my promise? She opened Merrick's final notebook again. In the margin beside an incoherent scrawl, a word had been pressed so faintly it was almost invisible. Barrel. She flipped to another page. There it was again, beside a rough sketch of the quarry. Barrel and an arrow pointing downward. Realization struck. The children hadn't been buried in the quarry. They'd been sealed inside something. She called Elias immediately. Within the hour, they were back at the quarry, floodlights cutting through mist. Divers entered again, searching the deeper recesses beyond the first recovery site. After 2 hours, one surfaced, shouting. A crane swung over the water, cables groaning. Slowly, a rusted metal barrel emerged from the depths, dripping black water. The markings were barely legible, but Clara could make out the faded stencil. 459B, the same number from the Army manifest. The coroner cut the lid open under forensic lighting. Inside lay human remains, older bones mixed with scraps of uniform fabric, and something else, a sheriff's badge, corroded nearly beyond recognition. Elias stepped closer, horror dawning. That's my father's. Clara stared into the barrel. The water shimmered darkly around the bones, and she realized there were more than one set. Not just your father, she whispered. Merrick's here too. The forensic tech looked up, pale. One skull has a bullet hole, close range. Whoever did this made sure it ended quietly. Elias turned away, his voice breaking. The army cleaned up its witnesses, every last one. But Clara wasn't listening anymore. Floating among the remains was a small glass slide. Film, preserved by oil and water. She lifted it carefully with tweezers. Through the translucent frame, an image appeared under the light. The three cousins, alive, standing by the quarry edge. And behind them, two figures in silhouette. One was unmistakably Merrick. The other wore a sheriff's hat. Clara felt her chest tighten. He didn't just sign the papers. He was there. The weight of it settled like a stone. The sheriff's promise had never been to the Barretts or the town. It had been to the army, and the children had paid for it. Rain began again, thin as static. The floodlights flickered, their reflections dancing across the black water. Elias whispered, "Maybe the quarry isn't done confessing." As if in answer, the crane cables creaked once more. Something else rose from the depths. A second barrel. This one split open. Inside, glinting through the mud, was a camera. The same vintage as the one that took the attic film. Its lens was cracked but intact. Clara stared at it, realization dawning. He filmed everything. The recovered camera sat inside a clear evidence box, dripping quarry water onto the stainless steel table. The coroner's office had gone quiet for the night. Only one lamp burned, throwing long shadows across the walls. Clara watched the technician, an old archivist from the university, pry the back open with surgical precision. The air filled with the smell of rust and stagnant oil. Inside, miraculously intact, was a roll of 16mm film, wound tight on its spool. The archivist looked up. If this reel survived 78 years underwater, it's a miracle. "You sure you want to see what's on it?" Clara nodded. "I've been waiting my whole life." He threaded the brittle film through the projector. The machine hummed to life, gears clicking like a pulse. A rectangle of light spilled onto the far wall. The first image flickered into being. The Barrett farm in sunlight. Camera unsteady. The lens catching laughter and movement. The cousins ran through tall grass, June twirling in a cotton dress, Howard chasing after her. Clara felt a sting behind her eyes. Then the picture steadied. The angle changed. Someone else held the camera now, someone taller. Sheriff Henry Wicks stepped into frame, adjusting his hat. He said something to Merrick, who stood off to the side, smiling faintly. The sound had long decayed, but their body language was enough. The sheriff pointed toward the creek, then toward the children. Merrick nodded. The footage jumped, brief static, and returned to the creekside clearing. The camera tilted down to the water's edge. The children were there again, but quieter now, watching something out of frame. A metal barrel rested half-submerged nearby, its lid open. The image trembled as if the person behind the lens hesitated. Then Henry Wicks stepped forward, lowering his voice, motioning for Merrick to lift one of the children, Howard, toward the barrel. Clara's stomach turned. "No!" The reel cut abruptly. White flare, then darkness, and resumed with a new scene. Night. The same clearing lit by lanterns. The sheriff and Merrick stood by the quarry's rim. Merrick gestured wildly, pleading. Wicks raised his service pistol. The flash of gunfire washed the screen in white. When the picture returned, only one figure remained. Merrick was gone. The sheriff crouched beside the barrels, wiping his hands on his coat. He looked up directly into the lens, eyes pale, calm, and reached forward. The film ended on the moment his hand covered the camera. Silence filled the room. Only the projector wheel clicked, the last frame burning slowly to brown. Elias, standing in the doorway, spoke hoarsely. He didn't just hide his crime, he directed it, frame by frame. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth. And then he buried the camera with them. The archivist shut off the machine. That's enough for tonight. But Clara couldn't move. The afterimage of her great-grandmother's porch lingered on the wall, ghost bright, as though the story itself refused to fade. Elias set a hand on her shoulder. We have proof now. The army, my father, the cover-up. It all leads back here. We turn this over to the state. She nodded numbly, though part of her already knew what came next. Garland Creek wouldn't thank them. The town's silence had been its survival. Breaking it would change everything. The next morning, word leaked. A reporter somehow obtained the manifest and the sheriff's letter. By noon, national outlets descended. On TV, the story played like a movie. The sheriff's secret, lost film solves 1945 disappearance. Clara stood at the edge of the quarry, watching crews drag the second barrel to shore. Reporters shouted questions she didn't answer. Elias joined her, a man both vindicated and broken. They'll call him a monster, he said quietly. But he thought he was saving the town from scandal. Clara's gaze lingered on the dark water. He saved the town and damned everyone else. A diver surfaced, waving something small and metallic. Ma'am! Found this lodged near the barrel, he handed it to her. A rusted locket, different from the first, engraved with initials barely legible. HJW. Inside was a picture of Eunice Barrett. Younger, smiling. Clara's voice faltered. He loved her. Elias turned sharply. What? The sheriff. My great-grandmother. That's why he swore the promise to her. Not the army. Not the town. The wind whipped across the quarry, carrying the faint echo of church bells from Garland Creek below. Elias stared at the locket, his face unreadable. Love or guilt, it's the same grave. That night, Clara uploaded a short clip from the digitized film to her private channel. Just 12 seconds of the cousins by the creek, laughter frozen in grainy light. The title read, 3 Lost Voices, Found. Within hours, it was everywhere. Millions of views, comments flooding with shock, sympathy, disbelief. The story that Garland Creek buried had finally learned how to speak. By dawn, Garland Creek looked like a set dressed for disaster. Satellite trucks lined Main Street, their dishes pointed skyward. Reporters camped on the courthouse steps, shouting questions about the film that solved a 78-year mystery. Clara watched from her grandmother's porch. The attention should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like aim. Her phone buzzed with messages, some from journalists, others from strangers thanking her for bringing peace. Mixed among them were different ones. You should have left them where they belonged. Truth won't save you. She deleted them, but they kept coming. Elias called around noon. His voice was tight. State investigators are pulling the case. They've seized the notebooks, the letters, everything. They said it's evidence under federal jurisdiction. They can't just take it, Clara said. They already did. A knock echoed through her hallway. She turned. A figure stood outside the screen door. A man in a raincoat, hat low, face hidden in shadow. When she opened the door, no one was there. Only an envelope on the porch boards. Inside lay a single Polaroid, freshly developed. The image showed her kitchen window, taken from outside. She'd been at that window less than an hour ago. Her hands trembled. That evening she met Elias behind the diner, away from cameras. He looked older, his badge gleaming dully under the parking lot light. They told me to step down, he said. Internal review. They said I compromised the department. You didn't compromise it, Clara said. You exposed it. He shook his head. I went back to the archives before they sealed them. Found this. He handed her a yellowing memo stamped Confidential, Army Liaison. To Sheriff Wicks. Ensure the barrels remain undisturbed. The children must be kept silent until extraction confirmed. You will be compensated for cooperation. Extraction, Clara whispered. They meant the barrels. Or the witnesses, Elias said. Either way, they paid him. A sound cut through the air. A car engine idling. Headlights flashed once from the alley, then went dark. Both turned. Elias's hand went to his holster. Get in your car, Clara. Go home and lock the doors. She didn't argue. The farmhouse felt smaller that night. Wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere out in the dark, water dripped steadily from the porch roof. She laid the Polaroid on the table beside the locket and whispered, "What did you promise her?" The landline rang again. This time, she didn't hesitate. "Clara Dallow." The voice was low, distorted, like old tape. "You have something that belongs to us." "Who is this?" "The film, the notebook. The truth, a pause. It dies with you." The line clicked. She backed away, heart pounding, every sound amplified. The creak of the floor, the hiss of wind through cracks. Her flashlight beam swept across the room and caught something on the wall. Words scratched into the wallpaper, faint but new. "We kept them safe." Her breath came in shallow bursts. She stumbled outside, the cold air biting her face. Headlights flashed again, Elias's truck. Relief flooded her chest until she saw him step out, weapon drawn. "Inside," he shouted, "now!" They moved through the kitchen together. The back door hung open, the lock splintered. Muddy footprints crossed the floor and ended near the cellar door, then vanished. Elias descended first, flashlight cutting through dust. "Empty," he called. "Whoever it was." A sharp crack interrupted him, a gunshot from outside, echoing through the fields. Clara ducked instinctively, her ears ringing. Elias barreled back up the stairs. "Stay here!" Through the window, she saw movement by the pecan tree. 2 figures running, one firing into the air. Then engines revved, tires spun, and darkness swallowed everything. When the noise faded, only the steady drip of rain remained. Elias stood at the doorway, chest heaving. "Federal plates. Their cleaning house. They tried to kill us." He holstered his weapon, voice shaking with rage. "Not yet. But they're warning us to stop." Clara sank into a chair, trembling. What if they're right? What if it's better not to know? Elias looked toward the cellar. Truth doesn't care what's better. Later, when silence finally returned, she found another envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a strip of film, one single frame. Under a magnifying glass, she saw the image clearly. Sheriff Wicks standing in front of a warehouse, shaking hands with 2 soldiers. Behind them, stacked barrels labeled 459B, scrawled on the edge of the frame in faded ink. The day they paid him. Clara stared at it until dawn, the projector light still ghosting across her walls, knowing every frame she uncovered was one frame closer to her own disappearance. By the second night, Garland Creek was no longer a town. It was a siege. Federal agents stood at intersections. Reporters were barred from the quarry. The official statement said, "Ongoing contamination management." No one mentioned the bones. Inside the farmhouse, Clara worked by lantern light. Every creak of the floor sounded like a countdown. On the table sat a laptop, the projector reel, and Elias's service revolver. He paced behind her, jaw tight. "If we leak this, they'll bury us with it." "They already tried," she said, eyes on the screen. She uploaded the digitized film, the sheriff's letter, and the manifest into a secure cloud folder. The upload bar crawled forward. 10%, 20. A car engine hummed outside. They froze. Headlights sliced through the window, stopping on the porch. Then darkness, footsteps on gravel. Elias whispered, "Basement." Now they slipped down the narrow stairs, the flashlight trembling in Clara's hand. From above came the splinter of the door, boots on wood, voices too calm to be burglars. 2 upstairs, a man said. 1 downstairs. Clara crouched behind the shelves, breath shallow. The upload on her phone ticked upward, 50%. A beam of light swept across the cellar steps. Elias raised his weapon. The first agent appeared at the top, rifle drawn. Elias fired once. The bullet slammed into the door frame. Return fire shattered the light bulb, plunging the cellar into black. "Get out!" he hissed. "Through the storm door!" Clara ran, boots slipping on the damp floor. She shoved open the rear hatch, cold rain hitting her face. Behind her, gunfire cracked again. She turned just long enough to see Elias fall, a dark bloom spreading across his shoulder. "Go!" he shouted. She went. She sprinted through the fields, grass whipping at her legs. The phone clutched like a lifeline. The signal bars flickered. 70%, 80%. Headlights swung behind her, searching. A single thought pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Finish the upload. She reached the tree line near the creek and dropped to her knees. Mud soaked her jeans. 90%. She whispered through her teeth, "Come on, come on." A hand seized her wrist. She screamed, twisting free, flashlight beam jerking across a face she half recognized. Gray hair, deep scar down the left eye. Merrick. He looked impossibly old, water dripping from his coat, voice ragged but lucid. "You think truth makes ghosts sleep? It feeds them." Clara backed away, shaking. "You killed them." "I saved them," he said softly. "From him. From what he made me do." His eyes flicked toward the farmhouse lights. "They'll burn this place before morning. The film dies with us." The phone chimed. "Upload complete." Clara stared at the glowing screen, then back at him. "Not anymore." Merrick exhaled, a sound between laugh and sob. "Then God help you." A gunshot split the air. His body jerked once, then crumpled into the mud. Behind him, a flashlight beam swept closer, agents closing in. Clara turned and ran for the creek, the cold water biting her knees as she crossed. In the distance, the farmhouse caught fire, orange light blooming against the rain. She didn't stop until she reached the highway. Trucks roared past, oblivious. On her phone, the video auto-posted, "The Garland Creek film, full evidence." Within minutes, notifications exploded across the screen. The world was watching. By dawn, the story had spread everywhere. News anchors spoke her name like myth. Federal officials denied involvement. The Army called the footage inauthentic, but the public had already decided. Elias survived. Barely. He told investigators everything. The cover-up collapsed in fragments, one denial at a time. Clara never returned to the farmhouse. The land was condemned, declared unstable from chemical degradation. Sometimes, late interviews caught her staring past the cameras, eyes unfocused, as if still listening to children's laughter carried on creek water. When asked if she believed the ghosts of Garland Creek were finally at rest, she always gave the same answer. Truth doesn't bury the dead. It just hands the living a shovel and a choice. 6 months later, Garland Creek was quiet again. The weeds grew tall where the farmhouse had stood. The only sign it had ever existed was a patch of blackened soil, still faintly smelling of ash when it rained. Clara parked her rental car at the edge of the property. She hadn't planned on coming back, but the trial was over. The archives were open. The news crews had finally left. She needed to see what was left of her family's ghosts. She stepped out, boots sinking slightly in the damp earth. The creek still whispered nearby, the same sound it had made in the 1940s when the 3 cousins vanished on a warm July afternoon. The world knew now. Sheriff Wicks had struck a deal to hide experimental barrels meant for transport to a remote site. The cousins had stumbled upon them while playing. He silenced them, then ordered Merrick, his deputy, to dispose of the bodies and swear silence under threat. When Merrick couldn't live with it anymore, he'd written everything down and hidden the film in his barn, the one Clara's grandmother had later inherited. A time capsule of guilt that waited for someone brave or desperate enough to press play. Clara knelt by the creek's edge. The reflection that stared back was older, thinner, the faint scar on her temple a reminder of that night. She had testified. She had told the world what she'd seen, but part of her never left the cellar. She took a small object from her pocket, the restored locket she'd found that first day. Inside, the cousin smiled forever in sepia tones. She placed it gently on a smooth rock by the water and whispered, "You can rest now." Behind her, someone approached, slow, deliberate steps crunching through wet grass. She turned and saw Elias, his arm still in a brace, but alive. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Reporters are still sniffing around." "Let them," she said. "This place belongs to them now." He joined her by the creek, lowering himself stiffly to one knee. "You know, they found another roll of film at the junkyard. Same handwriting as Merrick's. Looks like he was documenting the cleanup. Maybe he planned to confess before it all burned." Clara looked toward the horizon, where clouds bruised the sky purple and gold. "He did confess," she said. "He just didn't know who would listen." Elias studied her for a long moment. "What will you do now?" "Keep telling it," she said. "The truth doesn't end just because the story did." A gust of wind rippled across the water, scattering the reflection of the trees. For a heartbeat, Clara thought she saw 3 small figures standing in the shallows, watching her with soft, grateful eyes. Then, the image dissolved. She smiled faintly. "Goodbye, boys." When she looked again, the creek was empty. 2 years later, a documentary aired under the title, The Garland Creek Film. It opened with Clara's voice, calm, measured, older. In 1945, 3 cousins disappeared without a trace. For 78 years, their families searched for answers. What they found was never supposed to be found at all. The footage of the burned farmhouse played in silence. Then came the recovered frames. Sheriff Wicks shaking hands with the soldiers, the same frames Clara had uploaded that night. Across the world, millions watched. Comment sections filled with theories, outrage, sorrow. The government issued another statement calling the footage unverifiable, but no one believed them anymore. Garland Creek became a name whispered in classrooms, podcasts, late-night discussions about the cost of truth. Elias retired soon after, his badge tarnished but his conscience finally clear. Clara moved to a small coastal town and opened a modest museum dedicated to stories that refused to die. On its wall hung a single photograph, the cousins smiling beside the creek. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Truth sleeps until someone is loud enough to wake it." Some nights, when storms rolled in and the sea hissed against the rocks, Clara swore she could hear faint laughter carried through the wind. 3 young voices, finally at peace. And somewhere in the endless archive of the internet, the Garland Creek video still plays, view counter rising, ghosts immortal in pixels, their story told again and again to whoever dares to watch until the end.